The whole stupid dinner party was my idea. I love cooking, showing off a bit, and figured it'd be nice for Mark and his buddies. You know, the whole happy wife thing. It should have been a normal night. Good food, a few drinks, the usual banter between Mark and his friends. But looking back, I guess, it was the start of everything. See, Mark's always been a bit too friendly with women, especially after a couple of beers. Flirts a little too much, smiles a little too wide. I've rolled my eyes at it before, but there was something different that night with Lisa. It wasn't just the teasing, which was bad enough, but the way they seemed to have this unspoken connection. The way he looked at her, the casual way he touched her on the shoulder like it was nothing when he passed her a plate, it snagged under my skin. And then, when I was busy in the kitchen, I saw it, his hand on her back. Not an accident, like he pretended later, but lingering. A slow stroke that made my stomach turn. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a second, I thought I might actually throw up across the room and ruin the salmon. I told myself I was being stupid. Lisa's been in their friend group forever, and Mark wasn't the type, right? That's what I kept repeating to myself. But why was I so worked up? Why was this stupid touch stuck in my head? Should have been the first sign, the first crack in the perfect little life I thought I had. Everyone else at the table seemed oblivious, laughing, and carrying on. It was all surreal. Like the world had tilted, and I was the only one who noticed. Later, tidying up, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. That touch, her smile at him, a little too wide, a little too knowing. Mark's shifty eyes when I walked back in, pretending he hadn't been caught. Should I have confronted them right then? Made a scene? The worst part? This tiny, traitorous voice in my head, whispering, it started. This is how it starts. The voice that told me nothing would ever quite be the same again. I wish I'd listened to that voice. I wish I'd packed my bags that night, walked out the door, and never let him back in. Those damn late-night phone calls, that's when it got real weird. You know, the kind of calls where his face changes, he drops his voice all low, and makes excuses to step away. He'd always been the workaholic type, but this was different. Screen hidden, sneaking out onto the balcony, and then back in like he was hiding something. Just clients, he'd say when I asked. Always the same vague answer. Bullcrap. Clients don't whisper sweet nothings into a phone. Clients don't make him smile that way, like he's got some secret. At first, I tried to convince myself it was my imagination going wild. But deep down, that traitor voice from the dinner party just got louder. See, I told you. This isn't normal. Then it happened, our anniversary. 10 years. I made a big deal, bought reservations at that fancy place we like. The morning of, not a word from Mark. It hit me hard. We'd always done something, even just a card. But that day, nothing. Like it didn't exist. I snapped when he strolled in that evening. Didn't even try to play it cool. You forgot, I said, my voice flat. He did that surprised look, eyes wide, stammering about a crazy workday, some project deadline. I knew he was lying. His eyes always gave him away. That night was bad, not a shouting match, nothing crazy. But something cracked between us. It was in the silences, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes. A distance settled in, a cold thing that used to be our warmth. It scared me. I don't mean scared like he'd hurt me, but scared of what it meant. That the life we built, that trust, it was all crumbling, bit by bit. It started to eat at me. I couldn't focus, couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake, listening to his breathing, wondering who was on the other end of those damn calls, whispering in the dark. He was slipping away, and there wasn't a thing I could do. I just wasn't ready for what I might find if I looked too hard. Stupid, I know, but fear does that to you, makes you cling to a tiny shred of hope instead of facing what's right in front of you. Something was dying between us. Not with a bang, but with a quiet whimper. We used to, well, you know. Not every night, but there was always that spark, the connection. Suddenly, even a simple hand on my thigh felt forced. He'd turn away, mumble about being tired, anything to avoid touching me. It shredded my insides. Maybe if it had been obvious disgust, it would have been easier. I could have raged and gotten it over with. But it wasn't that, it was just an absence. Like he wasn't really there anymore when we were together. Those nights, when he'd roll over and go straight to sleep, I'd lie awake, my heart pounding. It was lonely, lonelier than I'd ever felt. Then came the smell, faint at first, on a jacket thrown across the chair. Definitely perfume, but not mine. Floral and sweet, something I'd never wear. It clung to him like an accusation, a whispered secret against his skin. When I saw that same scent waft off Lisa a week later at the grocery store, my blood turned to ice. I remember just standing frozen in the cereal aisle, the box slipping out of my suddenly useless hands. This was my nightmare made real, the whispers in my head now backed up by something I couldn't ignore. I should have screamed, should have caused a scene right there. But, like always, I choked it back, plastered on a fake smile, finished the shopping, and went home, numb. That night I dug through his closet. I know it was pathetic, but I needed proof, something to hold on to. I found nothing. He was careful, too careful. I scrubbed my hands in the bathroom afterwards, trying to get rid of that cheap, sickly sweet perfume smell that now seemed to haunt me. Part of me still wanted to believe I was imagining it all. But how could I? It was there, clinging to him, marking him as someone else's. The worst part, though, wasn't the perfume or his pathetic excuses for coming home late. It was the space between us. We were a pair of strangers living in the same house, pretending everything was okay. I think, deep down, I wanted him to confess, to make it real so we could either fix it or just end it. But instead, the lies stretched thin, ready to tear, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. It should have been normal, grabbing his phone to check the time while mine was charging. But the second it was in my hands, that message flashed on the screen. A heart emoji, a stupid little red heart, and a name I'd never heard before, Sweet Pea. My stomach dropped to the floor. All the suspicion, the whispered doubts, they crashed into me right then. It wasn't paranoia. This was real. You'd think I'd let loose, throw the phone, scream bloody murder. But I didn't. Something cold settled over me. That traitor voice from the dinner party, the one I kept trying to silence, it cackled in triumph. This was the proof. He wasn't just working late. My perfect husband, the guy everyone thought was so devoted, he was calling some woman Sweet Pea. I don't remember putting his phone down or walking out the room. My mind was on fire, a jumble of rage, hurt, and this weird determination. I couldn't go on like this, pretending everything was fine, swallowing the lump in my throat. The not knowing had been awful, but now it was like a war had been declared. He'd messed with the wrong woman. The next few days were a blur. I barely slept, barely ate. People at work must have thought I was nuts, going through the motions but distant. Inside, though, I was planning. I started small, tailing him after work, watching where he went, seeing who he met. The lies he'd been telling me unraveled one by one. Those client dinners, bogus. The out-of-town conference, a lie. He parked in a random lot on the edge of town, switching cars with someone, a woman. I couldn't see her clearly, but it didn't matter. I was collecting evidence, building my case. It didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it might. Mostly, I just felt sick, like my body was betraying me. He was getting sloppy, too. Leaving his phone unlocked, sending messages at night he thought I wouldn't hear. The pet names got worse, the words more intimate. I'd lie there beside him, pretending to sleep, and memorize every damn one. It was my fuel, rage burning through the hurt, making me strong, making me ready. It was going to end. That I swore. I just didn't know how yet. I followed him like before, the cold fury a constant hum under my skin. I thought I was prepared, thought I'd figured it all out. But nothing could ready me for what I saw. Not a hotel lobby, not a cheap bar on the edge of town, the stupid little bistro near the river. The kind of place we used to go when we were first dating. There they were, Mark and Lisa, tucked into a candlelit corner like it was the most natural thing in the world. His hand was on her thigh. His stupid grin, the one he used to save for me, plastered across his face. But it wasn't his cheating that broke me. It was her, Lisa, our Lisa, my friend. That's what snapped inside me then. It was worse than some random woman. This was personal. Time fractured. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen outside that window. I remember flashes. Her hand brushing back his hair, the clink of their wine glasses as they toasted. My chest felt crushed, like I couldn't breathe. Suddenly, I wasn't just angry anymore. I was a tornado ripped loose. I wanted to burst inside, scream, tear them apart. I took a step forward, and then I stopped. The cold, calculating part of me, the part one didn't know existed, kicked in. This wasn't about a scene. This was about revenge. It had to be perfect. It had to hurt them like they'd hurt me. Stumbling away from the restaurant, I fought against the urge to vomit. The plan I barely knew I had, was already taking shape. Every bit of me was in agony. The shock, the rage, the humiliation of it eating me from the inside out. I couldn't go home, not then. I ended up in some dingy park, collapsing onto a bench. Must have sat there for hours, staring at nothing. As the night wore on, the fury didn't subside, it hardened. It became focused, razor sharp. Mark, Lisa, they thought they were smart, that they'd gotten away with it. They hadn't even considered that I'd fight back, let alone how. They were about to find out. It wouldn't be fast, and it wouldn't be clean. It would be slow, the perfect revenge. I had to tell someone. It was eating me alive. But who? My closest friends were his friends too, part of the whole tight-knit group Lisa wormed her way into. Trusting anyone felt impossible. Then I remembered Emily, an old roommate from college. Years since we'd talked, but she was always kind, a good listener. Risky? Sure, but I was desperate. Spilling everything was messy. Tears I didn't know I had left choked me up. Between sobs, I laid it bare. The lies, the perfume, the betrayal. Emily was amazing, full of rage on my behalf, validating everything I'd been feeling. It helped, having that anger mirrored back, knowing I wasn't crazy. But under the relief, a new kind of fear crept in. What if Emily slipped up, mentioned something? My secret was out in the world now, dangerous. As I left her apartment, that voice whispered again, "Trust no one." It was sinking in, how alone I really was in this. In the days that followed, I became two people. On the outside, I was normal Sarah. Made dinner, smiled at Mark's stupid jokes, went through the motions. But inside, a machine was assembling itself. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every stray hair on his jacket, every whispered phone call, it was fuel. I became obsessed with detail. I needed their routine, when they met, where they went, every lie he told me to cover his tracks. I'd lie in bed at night, planning. It wasn't just about catching them red-handed anymore, that was too easy. It had to be more. There were dark thoughts, even for me. Ruining him financially, public humiliation. I considered it all. In the end, though, the plan became clear, a twisted sort of elegance. They took my life, my happiness. I would take theirs, piece by meticulous piece. Mark was cocky, convinced he was in control. That was his weakness. I'd use it against him. No dramatic showdowns, no screaming matches. That was for weak people. My revenge would be surgical, cutting into the heart of everything he held dear. He would wish for the days when the worst of it was me throwing his clothes into the street. He just didn't know it yet. The getaway idea came out of nowhere. Even I was surprised. Breakfast one morning, completely out of the blue, I looked at Mark and said, "How about a weekend away? Just us. Reconnect a little." His eyes widened. Guilt or anticipation, I wasn't sure. But before he could fully process, I smiled, all sweetness, and kept going. That little place up by the lake. Remember how much we loved it? Mark was putty. He started rambling about needing a break, how stressed work had been. It was almost pathetic how readily he bought the act. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt at the manipulation, but it was quickly smothered under the icy satisfaction. He deserved this. The trap was sprung. With Mark on board, the rest fell chillingly into place. I called the inn, acting all disappointed when our usual room was unavailable. Feigning reluctance, I settled for a suite with a balcony, more expensive, but maybe nice for a change? Of course, Mark insisted it was perfect. The call to Lisa was the trickiest part. I used a burner phone, practiced my lines until I sounded natural, just old friends catching up. The final stroke of genius, the bait she couldn't resist? Guess where we're going this weekend? That same cute inn by the lake. Why don't you? What was that place you liked, the winery nearby? Surprise Mark with a visit? A slight hesitation on the other end, then she was in, hook, line, and sinker. Each step sent a jolt of dark thrill through me. Outwardly I was the perfect wife, planning our romantic getaway. Inside, I was a predator, laying the perfect snare. When I packed Mark's bag, I lingered over a silk tie I knew Lisa loved on him, a final touch to ensure she'd notice. The drive upstate was tense, a silent duel. Mark chattered nervously, clearly relieved I was playing nice. Every mile we traveled, the anticipation ratcheted higher. It was almost a relief when we arrived. The plan was set. All that was left was to watch it unfold. As we walked into the lobby, my heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just about catching them. They needed to know I was the one who orchestrated their downfall. The stage was set. All that remained was for the players to take their positions, and for the show to begin. That weekend, I became an actress. Every smile, every laugh, every brush of my hand against Mark's, it was all a performance. Breakfast, where I poured his coffee the way he likes, asking about his day, it made my stomach churn, but I executed it flawlessly. He relaxed, the idiot, thinking I'd given up, that this was a reset. Under the surface, though, it was pure acid. Every time he looked at me, knowing what he'd done, knowing what I knew, I felt the rage simmering, waiting for its chance to ignite. But patience had become my weapon. The slower the burn, the longer they would suffer. On the second day, it happened. We were by the pool, both pretending to read. Suddenly, Mark went stiff. I glanced over, and there she was. Lisa. Perfect hair, perfect bikini, walking straight towards us like she owned the place. Her smile was venomous when she saw who Mark was with. "Mark, darling, fancy meeting you here." Her voice was pure sugar, pitched loud enough to turn heads. Mark just gawked, the blood draining from his face. I almost laughed. All that bravado, that confidence, gone. He was a cornered animal, and the huntress had arrived. Inside, I was screaming. This was it, the moment I'd meticulously built, the start of their destruction. But outwardly, I was all wide-eyed innocence. Lisa, what a surprise. I hated how fake I sounded, but it was part of the game. We all sat there, an absurd little tableau. Me, the betrayed wife. Lisa, glowing with smug triumph. Mark, a panicking mess, stammering out some pathetic excuse about a work something. His lies were unraveling under her gaze, each one more desperate than the last. I made a show of sipping my drink, watching them squirm. This was just the first act. Their downfall was going to be a meticulously staged play, and I was the playwright, director, and star performer. And most importantly, unlike them, I was fully prepared for my role, even if it meant wearing this mask of normalcy a little while longer. Later that night, Mark made a pathetic attempt to play it off. Lisa, she's an old client. His voice trailed off, a weak echo in that fancy hotel suite. I almost admired the sheer audacity of it. Did he really think I was that stupid? My response was short, a verbal slap. Cut the crap, Mark. I know everything. I saw his bravado crumble. It was strangely unsatisfying. I wasn't after tears or apologies. I wanted complete and utter devastation. That would take time. The next morning, I picked the spot carefully. The hotel restaurant, bustling, public, nowhere for them to escape. As we walked in, I made sure Lisa saw us together. Mark must have sensed what was coming because he looked ready to bolt. Too late. We sat. I ordered a mimosa, a celebration of sorts. Then, I turned to them, my voice low and deadly. "So, when did it start?" Both Mark and Lisa stammered, tripping over denials. I cut them off, my smile all teeth. I pulled my phone out. Texts, dates, hotel receipts. Cute pet names, too. I read a particularly sickening message from Lisa aloud. Her face went from smug to scarlet, Mark a sickly shade of green. People were starting to stare. Good. The perfume, I continued, the lies about work. Each piece of damning evidence I laid out chipped away at their facade. Mark's attempts at defense grew weaker, more desperate. Onlookers were openly watching, whispering. This was no longer a private betrayal. I was making it a spectacle. With every secret revealed, every carefully constructed excuse demolished, I felt a surge of power. This was my courtroom, and I was judge, jury, and executioner. They looked pathetic, scrambling for any shred of control they once had. When I finally stood, leaving them with their untouched breakfast and a crowd of judging eyes, it was more than just walking away. I was seizing victory, one calculated step at a time. Mark had always underestimated me. That was his fatal mistake. But they hadn't seen anything yet. This was just the beginning. The second I walked away from that table, the whole world shifted. Mark, who'd always held himself with this unearned swagger, slumped in his chair, defeated. There were tears in his eyes when he looked at me, real tears, not some act. It should have been satisfying. It wasn't. "Sarah, please, I'm so sorry," he choked out. Lisa was trying to say something too, but her voice was lost under the buzzing whispers around us. I felt nothing but cold contempt. He'd broken me before, but this time I was unbreakable. His apologies washed over me like a bad wave. Pathetic, empty words that meant less than nothing. "Don't," I cut him off, my voice flat. "It's too late for your groveling, Mark. This isn't about fixing things. There's nothing to fix." The desperation ramped up. He started rambling about counseling, a fresh start, how much he loved me, all the usual cheater crap thrown at the wall to see what sticks. My response? Silence. I just looked at him, my gaze unwavering. Let him sweat, let him drown in the mess he created. He tried switching tactics, talking about consequences, our home, finances, as if any of that held power over me. His threats were as hollow as his promises. In my mind, I was already miles away, planning the next step, dismantling his world piece by piece. Watching him squirm, realizing the control he thought he had was an illusion, fueled something ruthless inside me. They say revenge is best served cold, they're right. My fury had crystallized into something far more dangerous. I wasn't the woman he'd cheated on anymore. He'd made a grave mistake, and it was time he learned just how much he miscalculated. As I left him sitting there in the wreckage, I knew I wasn't just walking away from a ruined marriage. I was walking away from the person I used to be, the one who'd foolishly believed his lies. Each step felt lighter, more assured. I didn't need his apologies or his excuses. I was perfectly capable of writing my own ending to this story, and it would be his worst.